Hello and welcome to another episode of I'm Still Playing. Today we're doing a full recap of the Wuthering Waves 2.6 Part 1 story. If you haven't completed the story yet and you don't want to be spoiled, well, by all means stop the video right now and go off and finish the story. I'm going to warn you though, it runs a little bit long and there is a ton of dialogue. If you haven't completed the story though and you don't care about being spoiled, in fact you're here literally because you got tired of all those story bits and you skipped all those cutscenes, well, I got you covered. We're going to cover the entire story. We're going to talk about maybe some things that you might have missed and even talk about some of the community theories. So let's get to it. So recall, we got a little prelude to 2.6 already, where we learned that we've been invited by none other than the F-Fall herself, Augusta, to attend the Grand Hunt in Septimont, which the story is going to fill us in on in just a moment as to what exactly that is. In short, though, we were told we needed to wait a few days as the F-Fall had things to attend to, so Abby and Rover have just been chilling in Septimont, getting fat and happy off of the F-Fall's dime. We finally get to notice that the F-Fall will see us now, and so off we go, and the story begins. Now, the F-Fall greets us in the way that any decent ruler would, by, attacking us. But Rover's ready for that shit, and she's just like, bring it, bitch. Of course, Augusta is just delighted at our show of strength, and we're already immediately best pals. So here is where we learn exactly what the Great Hunt is. Since the original dark tide eruption in Renacida over 100 years ago, the anomaly known as the Bright Cloud hangs over the Sanguis Plateaus, and periodically dark tide will spew forth from it in what's called a high tide. At that time, all of the gladiators in Septimont will gather up to deter it by killing all of the Tacit Discords that come out of the tide. Now, there's one key thing here. Rover wants to know why we've been invited specifically. And Augusta tells us that, well, mostly it's just that we're exceptional, and her hunters would love to fight beside us. But as we learn later, this is actually only half the truth. Rover also takes the opportunity here to tell Augusta that she is coming on the hunt, but she has her own goals. And that is to recover the relic of the Imperator that we learned about from Federico that you've probably already forgotten about. And Augusta is just like, no problem, honey. Most people can't go there, but I go where I want to, and so if you come on the hunt with me, I got you. Augusta informs us that we need to wait for the storm to rise, and then we'll meet her at the Tempest Cliffs. And one black screen with white text later, we are on our way. But before we could even get there, we encounter a prim and proper gladiator named Avidius, who is also coming along the hunt with us. More about him later. Before long, we're on some griffin things, getting a free ride to the Sanguinus Plateaus. But we haven't even arrived there yet when our journey is interrupted by a big old Tacit dinosaur named Tyrannos, and we have our first pseudo-boss fight. And I want to just say this is in fact a pseudo-boss fight, because it quickly becomes obvious through my terrible dodge rolls that you cannot die in this fight. And dear Rovers, I can't tell you how disappointing I find this. I mean, let us die and repeat the fight over and over again, allowing us to lower the difficulty if we need to. But you are seriously cheating us of some agency by not allowing us to die in these boss fights. Just cut it out, Kiro. Anyway, before we've even got Tyrannos halfway down, we cut to a cutscene and Yuno saves the day with a well-placed moon arrow. After Tyrannos flees, we make our way to the Hunter's Den, which is an encampment on the edge of the plateau. Here we get a tour from Avidius. After some barbed exchanges between Yuno and Avidius, we get a proper introduction to Yuno, whose role in all of this isn't entirely clear, though she seems keen on participating in the hunt as well. She takes her departure, inviting us to visit her at Tetragon Temple as she goes. Now we get a little bit more exposition as to what exactly is going on. We learn that Earthwind Wedge, imbued with the power of the Sentinel, is the only place where we can possibly sever the connection between the Leviathan and the Dark Tide. But the wedge is actually a location, and its range is limited, so the hunters have to kill the Tacit Discords close to the wedge, specifically in an area known as Maroonwood. Tyrannos is being driven to Maroonwood right now, so all we need to do is just wait for it to get there and then go kill it. Augusta is called away from matters of the commander, and this is the first time we see that she's actually being plagued by voices, described only as whispers. We're given freedom to roam about the camp, but mostly, it's just an opportunity to show us that the Senate favors the gladiator Avidius to receive the title of the Hero of Heroes. This is a hero spoken of in prophecy that will supposedly deliver Septimont from the Dark Tide. And even though Augusta is the current F-Fall, she has only a mediocre resonance power, and so she's not nearly as highly regarded by the Senate. Next, we're off to say hello to Yuno back up in her temple, which is surprisingly actually right there on the plateau and is a mighty fancy affair. In fact, even Rover thinks so. On the way there, we come across a fellow named Belfonte, who doesn't hold Yuno in too high of a regard. In fact, he flat out warns us to just stay away from her. Now, at the time, this appears to be a bit of a throwaway conversation, but it becomes crucial later on, as we'll see. Once inside the temple, we're shown a couple of murals. On one wall, we get depictions of the various hero of heroes of the past. And on the other wall, one mural appears to convey a dire warning for Septimont. Below that, though, there is a large mural also speaking of the hero of heroes and how they shall bring eternity to Septimont. The waters shall quiet, the tempest still, and glory return with the blood of the old king. But this mural has a large patch in the middle that is actually missing. And the story straight up tells you, oh, by the way, this is really important. We're still admiring the murals and trying to make sense of them when we're interrupted by Avidius, who's going to mansplain the purpose of the murals to us. Like, we can't read the text on the walls just fine ourselves. Fortunately for us, Yuno shows up to poke fun of him and shoo him away. As she does so, though, she sort of lays plain Avidius' plans, which is to cement his position as the hero of heroes and potentially the F-Ball himself by defeating Tyrannos and the Dark Tide. His naked ambition is made plain here, and it's pretty clearly pissing Yuno off. Yuno makes even more clear her unwavering support for Augusta, but there is one key thing that she mentions here. Avidius makes her uncomfortable, and it's not his naked ambition, it's more something about the man himself. Something feels unnatural. And we'll find out why this is the case near the end. So the griffin thingy reveals itself, and it's time to resume the hunt. But before we go, our attention is drawn by a little old lady named Lilibet. She is a seer, of course she is, and she speaks to us of having a void and an unknowable fate, and then assures us that the void is not nothingness, and we really shouldn't let it bother us too much. Aquila, which apparently is the name of the griffin thingy, takes off to show us where Tyrannos actually is, and it's implied here that Yuno can see through the griffin's eyes. And it's really all that she needs to know, as she lines up another extravagant moon arrow and lights the beacon. And Gondor calls for aid. So our hunt is finally about to start for reals, but before we can go, Augusta wants to give us the strategy, which is apparently to place 3 anchor stones imbued with the power from the Earth-Wind Wedge. This will drive Tyrannos to a spot that we want in the Asphodel Barrens. The hunt commences with us making our way to the first anchor stone. We've just placed the first stone when Tyrannos makes a sneak attack on Augusta. Tacet Dinosaur runs off though, and Augusta follows. And Yuno shows up then to tell us what the real plan is, and for this, Tyrannos is really just being used as bait. So, off we go to the second anchor stone with a warning from Yuno that the Tacet Dinosaur may be laying a trap for us. We have a quick fight with the mini-boss, and for once, we're actually allowed to use our own party members. That was sweet. After the mini-boss fight, you're reunited with Augusta and forced back to the trial party of Arrow, Rover, and Augusta. Oh, and by the way, even though the boss fights aren't losable, you're going to spend a lot of time in this story as Arrow Rover. If you're like me and Arrow Rover is your least favorite rover, you might find it useful to spend a little bit of time reviewing her skill kit. Okay, back to the story. A few more TD fights later, and you're placing the second anchor stone. With the second stone in place, we continue making our way through the plateau to the third anchor stone. Clearing all the TDs around that one too is also placed. Now, with the 3 stones in place, all that remains is to follow Tyrannos to the Asphodel Barrens, where we learn that a great many warriors have died on this field. Nothing really remains now but to face Tyrannos on the field, and even Yuno is ready to get things going. Augusta commands Avidius to join her against the Colossus, but then when we complete the fight, it appears that, well, we're just fighting with Augusta alone. And yes, this is another boss fight where you actually can't lose. At the very end of it, though, it appears that supposedly Avidius was actually with us during the fight, but ultimately it's Augusta who slashes off the creature's horn, lands on it, and then drives it away. And Yuno sees a vision that causes her to wonder if Augusta really is the hero of heroes. Alright, so now we learn that all of this was just a preamble to the real trap, which was to bait an entity within the Dark Tide to manifest itself to consume the Chorosaur. At the moment the Dark Tide entity showed itself, Yuno was to strike it with her moon arrow. The plan doesn't go as planned. The arrow is blocked, and Yuno is pulled into the Dark Tide, where she is very nearly consumed before Augusta can interrupt the entity and allow Yuno to escape. Abby pops out and consumes enough of the Dark Tide to force it to retreat, and we retrieve an injured Yuno. Also, right at this moment, Augusta hears more of the whispers that have plagued her, with them tempting her to give up her human form and accept a gift from divinity, and that she should return to Murmustown. Now, what we don't know yet is that Murmustown is Augusta's hometown, which is where she set out on her journey to become a gladiator after her family and friends were wiped out from a high tide event. One friend in particular, in fact, but we'll get to that later. While Yuno was held by the Dark Tide, she had a vision, and this has her convinced that Septimon's fate may have already been decided, and Augusta may very well be the cause of its downfall. Augusta is like, yeah, okay, whatever. Rulers become so by doing impossible things, and then she takes over to oversee the retreat and leaving us to take care of the injured Yuno. Now, while taking her to Yuno, she reveals to us that the vision she saw was both the destruction of Septimon and the death of Augusta, and that these fates have always before been unavoidable. It goes on to say, though, that Lilibet's vision for Rover is what makes her unique, and her unknowable fate means that her destiny is not yet determined. And then she shares with us a key secret. She has given up the ability to predict the fates because she is tired of seeing things that she cannot change. Rather, she has replaced that ability and gained the resonance power that can affect the Dark Tide itself. She explains that the entity that they tried to kill, this manifestation of the Dark Tide that they call the False Sovereign, can consume, shape, and reform Darktide creations. They had hoped that defeating it was going to be the key to perhaps undoing the fate of Septimont before it could even begin. But more importantly, we also learn here that when Yuna uses her resonant power to resist the Darktide, she literally gives up a small piece of her very existence. Not her life force, her existence. Before we go though, Yuna gives us one of her lunar bracelets, which contains a small part of her resonance power. And so off we go to have more lengthy conversations. First off, we have a quick chat with Avidius, where we learn that Avidius is not quite the evil guy that we think he is, and even he realizes that the threat to Septimont here is greater than his naked ambition. We also get a quick history lesson from him about how he was the only survivor of his great deeds in the past, and of his 4 trips to Main's Deep. We catch up with Augusta making plans for the next step of the effort against the Darktide. To gain assistance, she's contacted Black Shores and has been in contact with a consultant named, you guessed it, Buling. I was so glad to see Buling back. Rover, of course, offers to take over communications with Buling. Buling is quick to tell us that this time the Darktide is even crazier, off the charts, and different than before, and that it's manifesting as a person, this sovereign, and it's currently consuming frequencies like crazy. Its goal, in fact, is to consume enough energy to smash Earthwind Wedge in a single blow. This, in turn, would release all of the Darktide energy that Earthwind Wedge is currently keeping in check, and subsequently destroy Renesita. She also explains that the reason Augusta's and Yuna's plan didn't work is that a strange frequency occurred midway through the hunt, awakening the Sovereign way before it should have been. So the tables were turned, and it was ready for Yuna's attack. Now, we can't seem to find where that strange frequency came from, but they can tell us that the Sovereign itself is consuming frequencies in the general area of Murmurstown, and it's there Augusta wants to go. And it's now that Augusta hears even more messages from the Whispers, congratulating on her returning to Murmurstown, and that Fabianum awaits her. Fabianum, as we learn later, is the original name of Murmurstown before it was destroyed by the Darktide. So now Murmurstown is just known as the Wastelands, and it was the location of the High Tide from 16 years ago. It serves as a grim reminder of what will happen to Septimont if they fail to stop the Darktide now. We also encounter the Hollow Figures, people consumed by the Darktide and reanimated, whom now only murmur and sing hymns of praise for the Darktide. Remember how the Darktide was referred to before as the Journeying Paradise? Well, these are the remnants of people that were lost to that paradise, where even death was not a release. And now their songs can bring about the Darktide's corruption to those that hear them. So it's quickly decided that we need to split up and look for the Sovereign, so we're back by ourselves once again. We're not having much luck, so we contact Buling to see if she can help us track down the Sovereign's frequency. She complains that the frequencies are all muddled because it's eating frequencies faster than she can get a fix on them. However, if we could bring her a sample of one of these frequencies from around there, she might be able to help us. So we bust out Abby to help us track down such a thing, and together we stumble across a waystone, which is apparently just a statue pointing in a particular direction. The waystone triggers a frequency that flies off. Abby and Rover take off in pursuit of the frequency and eventually come across a relic of sort, a bit of cloth that looks like it belongs to the waystone. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Augusta is nearing the petrified remains of what appears to be a hollow in an old tree, and here the Whispers are speaking their strongest, attempting to convince Augusta to embrace their power, to cast off her mortal coil, and she'll become everything she desires, the one true ruler of Septimont. But Augusta's like, nah, you know what, that would be unearned, and I'm really not about that, and so she declines the offer, again. Okay, so Rover and Abby deliver the cloth relic back to the waystone, and they're granted with the words from the spirit of an unyielding gladiator, who basically reveals that what they've done has just triggered a Sonoro. Augusta rejoins them, gets caught up on what Abby and Rover have been up to, and of course they're not going to just not go into the Sonoro, although Augusta is somewhat hesitant to learn what the Sonoro may have to show. Oh, and I love the fact that the Waystone's message is essentially a homage to Dante's The Divine Comedy with "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." And it very quickly becomes clear that we're in a Sonoro of Murmurstown past, and it's not long before we encounter a series of conversations between a quote-unquote familiar child and another childhood friend. Okay, now sidebar here, here's something I don't understand. Why are the children here frequencies of the past? We're in a Sonoro of Murmurstown past already, so why aren't they just physical manifestations of the children in the town? I don't think we should be having frequencies of the past inside a Sonoro of past Murmurstown. But what do I know? In any event, we learn quite a bit through these conversations. The familiar sounding girl is obviously Augusta as a child, and in fact she even confesses this to Rover eventually. The other girl is her childhood friend Angel, and of the two, Angel is actually much stronger in her resonance power. We also learn that the children believe in a story or a prophecy that you can reach a place called Main's Deep through an old hollow in an oak tree, and from there, whispers from the original hero of heroes will grant you incredible resonance powers. As a result of this, Augusta, whose resonance power is very weak, well, she is keen to reach there, an angel who's her friend and actually just wants to help. Pretty soon, though, the phantoms shift, and the snarl brings us to the moment the dark tide overran Fabianum. Augusta and Angel are hiding, surrounded by Tacit discords. Angel has been injured and she can't go on. However, though, they're rescued by a gladiator who falls in the attempt, but buys them enough time to flee. The two children flee through the streets and eventually come to the Oak Hollow leading to the mains. Augusta forces Angel into the hollow and then stands to defend her against the dark tide. But interestingly, the tide ignores Augusta and instead pursues Angel into the hollow. And it is then that Augusta hears the whispers for the first time, and they tell her that she is too weak to even be pursued by the dark tide, and instead they will take Angel, the stronger of the two. Augusta, now back in the now, tells us that this is when she started on her journey to become the Ethal, that she would gain in strength until she was strong enough to become the hero of heroes, regardless of her resonance power, and regardless of what the Senate believes. She also mentions here that the person the prophecy describes as a hero of heroes actually fits Rover to a T, and should that be the case, she would accept the challenge to face Rover willingly. We also learn that she never knew what exactly happened when the dark tide entered the hollow in pursuit of Angel. Only that when Angel emerged, she had become so powerful that she put down the dark tide herself, but that her resonance power overcame her and transformed her into something not human, and that Augusta has never seen Angel since. In fact, we catch a single last phantom of this actually occurring, and then the phantoms vanish, and a piece of dark energy remains there. Perfect for sample gathering. One thing important here, Augusta wonders how it is exactly that Angel was carrying the dark tide's frequency. In any event, we dash the frequency off to Wuthering, and she feels like she's got a good read on where the Sovereign is hiding now. But here's the thing. In short, Wuthering is saying that this frequency we found is in fact associated with the dark tide, but it's different. Undisturbed, if you will. And currently it's not super dangerous, but man, if it was combined or mixed with another frequency, it could cause an explosion. And again, Augusta's like, whatever, we're just going to go kill it. But before we get to the killing, we're witness to a conversation between Avidius and the members of the Senate, who are reminding him that he needs to step the F up. And he's all like, look, my dudes, I'm doing this for my fellow man, not for your recognition. But before they can go much further, the senator accusing him falls to the corruption of the Hollow people. Avidius knows of an herb that can help, and so he sets off in search of it. In doing so, he finds himself at the very Oak Hollow that he remembers led to Mains Deep. But upon entering it, he finds nothing there. And before he can even think about what the ramifications of this means, he is called to the hunt. Okay, it's time for the hunt. We're coming up on what is quite obviously a boss arena, but there's no sign of the Sovereign. Rover draws out the lunar bracelet Yuno gave her, and the smell of Yuno's resonance power is enough to lure the Sovereign out. The fight is on. Or is it? Because we're not even a third into this fight when the Sovereign goes all ballistic, knocking Avidius clean out of the arena and makes its escape into the hollow, and then engulfs the area with dark tide energy. And this time, even Abby can't consume all of the energy. And so now it seems the Sovereign has seized control of the Earthwind Wedge itself. So once again, we're regrouping and licking our wounds. Yuno shows up and sees that the wedge has in fact fallen. Augusta is hearing the whispers that the power that she refused will now be her undoing. But with typical Ethel resolve, Augusta recovers her composure and begins issuing command orders. Alright, so now our party is in big trouble. The false Sovereign has just absorbed all of the frequencies of fallen warriors where we fought, has seized control of the wedge, and will soon release a dark tide from below the plains. But Wuthering has an idea. Right now, the Sovereign itself is a bit scrambled on the inside due to having just engorged itself on dead frequencies. As such, Wuthering says that if we can scramble those frequencies in its gut just a little more, even just a little bit, we could throw it off balance and perhaps get control of the wedge back. But before she can even finish the plan, we lose contact. The Sovereign is consuming frequencies so quickly that now we can't even communicate. Yuno, however, is picking up what Wuthering is putting down, and if we were to feed it an anchor stone, it might be enough to throw it off and perhaps even destroy it. There are only two problems. First, the dark tide must be convinced to swallow the anchor stone. And then second, it has to be stable enough and kept in human form long enough for us to defeat it. Now the first test goes to Rover and Augusta, and Yuno will tackle the second. Augusta, though, immediately recognizes the peril here. Not to her, but to Yuno. The dark tide is far, far stronger now than it has been, and it's going to take a lot more of Yuno's resonance power to subdue and stabilize it. Yuno dismisses Augusta's concerns with her typical aplomb. I'm not made of glass, she says. Rover here attempts to return the bracelet to Yuno, but Yuno insists that she keep it. And then she reminds her, no matter where you go, a part of me goes with you. And then, in the most foreboding statement ever, Yuno requests that no matter what happens, Rover remain by Augustus' side. Apocalyptic much? We also get the meaning of the unknowable void, and that it is that our fate is determined solely by Rover's will. And so Rover does indeed make the promise to stay by Augustus' side. Before we set out, Augusta has one last question. Can those who don't have unwritten fates, well, can they ever escape that fate? And Yuno replies honestly that she doesn't know. But before Rover and Augusta clear the area, she reminds them that regardless of their fate, humans decide how they walk the path of that fate, and that a ruler accomplishes the impossible for their subjects. And with that, we're off to face the Sovereign again. Before we can reach it, though, we do come across a broken Avidius, wondering now at his own existence, his memories, now that he was in the Dark Hollow and he saw no entrance to Main's Deep. So we stop off and pick up an anchor stone. Remember, we're going to use it to shove down the Sovereign's throat, somehow. Then the final act begins. Augusta immediately smashes up the anchor stone, reasoning that even the smallest piece should be enough to do the thing. So Augusta and Rover run the gauntlet and make our way back to the blackened Earthwind Ridge. In the meantime, Yuno reaches her position and, drawing upon her Yuno bow, literally splits the skies to herald our arrival. With the final plot from Yuno to Augusta, we make our way down into the boss arena. But before we begin, Augusta has something to say. She's keying off the fact that the Dark Tide says it answers only to strength, and she tells us that she's always been hearing the whispers since that moment 16 years ago. As she grew stronger, though, the whispers faded, until she became Ephal, and then since then they've been nothing but a constant noise in her head, and that every time she deterred from their guidance, fate would strike her down, that they knew the way better than her. And so, she reasons, the words of the old prophecy have come true. Now, what's unclear is if she's talking about the prophecy of how a hero would bring about Septimon's ruin or its salvation. But either way, she's ready to square off against Rover. And so the first part of our battle is, of course, against her. But soon we learn what's really going on. Augusta wants her battle against us to serve as marking Rover as the hero of heroes. And soon the whispers are talking to her, telling her it's not too late, that she can still embrace the power. And now Augusta shows what she has known all along. The power of the whispers spoke of is just a lie. It doesn't want the most powerful, it wants her, specifically her. Augusta demands that Rover finish the fight to become the hero of heroes, and in doing so, she allows the whispers to consume her, which is exactly what she wants. The Dark Tide taunts her, promises her an eternity of despair, haunting her with visions of her past. But Augusta begins to cast off everything that she has gained, every sword, the crown, all of it. The tide revels in its victory. But Augusta is not done. She has the fragment. And in a moment that did have me cheering more than a little bit, she bursts forth out of the center of the Sovereign. And now we're on for the real boss fight, the two of us against the Sovereign. As we get close to the end of the battle, Rover begins to wrest the Earthwind back. The Sovereign tries to intervene, but Augusta will have none of it. And calling upon all of the lost souls that fell to the Dark Tide before her, all of the frequencies the tide has consumed, she reforms her sword, and the power of 1,000 generations blasts through and destroys the false Sovereign. In the aftermath of the battle, Augusta refers to Rover as the hero of heroes. But Rover makes a good point. The prophecy could describe Augusta just as well. And so Augusta suggests that, well, perhaps they will share that title. When asked what happened while she was inside of the Dark Tide, she explains only that the frequencies of those who were consumed by the Dark Tide aided her, and they, along with all of those that stood beside her, allowed her to achieve her victory. Now, here's the thing. As they show the picture of all those who stood beside her, notice who's missing from this picture. Rover again asks why, ultimately, Augusta asked her to join the hunt. And now we get the other half of that question. Augusta explains that it was Rover's unwritten fate, that perhaps she was the key to filling in that missing piece in the murals for the hero of heroes. And then she fulfills her promise and allows Rover to go and retrieve the Imperator's relic from the Earthwind Wedge. The relic itself is a discoid, and Augusta thinks that maybe it can be opened. We're unable to open it, but perhaps someone that we know can. Someone intimately connected to the Imperator. And now we get a couple of fantastic post-credit scenes. Christopher recovers the medal flung aside by Avidius and refers to him as his creation, his near-perfect protagonist. And he wants to see how far the soul that he created can go. That's right. Apparently, Avidius is entirely a creation of Cristoforo. Excellent. And then we get the final post-credit scene, a character we already knew from the drip marketing as Galbrina. And she's here to kill Thrunodians and chew bubblegum. And she's all out of gum. Now, we don't know exactly who Galbrina is yet, but there's quite a bit of speculation from the community that Galbrina is Angel all grown up. For one, she literally has wings. And two, she says, "It's been a while, Renacida," inferring that she has been there before, at least. And then there's this little bit from a trailer that Kiro dropped over 3 months ago that says, "An Outlander returns from whence they came," while showing Galbrina. Now, it certainly isn't confirmed, but there are more than a few signs pointing to her being Angel, to be sure. And finally, there is one loose end left to be tied off. What has become of Yuno? Since the conclusion of the battle with the Sovereign, Augusta has not mentioned Yuno once by name, though she is very clearly close and dear to her. And then the clincher. After the story, if you go up to the temple and you talk to Belfonte, whom you chatted with before, he has no recollection of Yuno. It's as if her existence has been removed from his memory. So, two things here. First, clearly Rover does remember Yuno, but she may be alone in that regard. It appears that Yuno may have used so much of her resonance power in stabilizing the Sovereign that she has literally removed her own existence. Now, this one I did not see coming, and this is probably both the saddest and coolest twist of the entire story so far. But recall, Rover has a part of Yuno's existence on her, and this may be why she remembers Yuno. And hopefully, this may also be the key to bringing her back in part 2 of the story. I guess we'll just have to see. Okay, so that's about it. What a long, strange trip it's been, right? What did you think of the story? Do you think Angel is Calbrina? Did you enjoy the story, or just find it a snooze fest? Whatever your thoughts, please share in the conversation in the comments. And if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, whatever you're playing, play hard. Cheers!